Well, welcome up to another edition of our podcast. I'm not even going to attempt to work out what number this is. It's many, more than last time. And today we're going to start talking a little bit about mental health. And the reason for that is, well, it's sort of threefold at least. I mean, one, this is a question that comes up when we get asked about this kind of stuff. I think we're all conscious that the diagnosis of mental health conditions is much higher now than it was, say, 25 years ago. I can observe that. So we get asked about it. I think we also kind of encounter it. You and I encounter it. You do as well. We do encounter this kind of issue of folk who are clearly struggling with various things and maybe have a diagnosis of that. Maybe they don't have a diagnosis of that. And if they've got a diagnosis, what does that mean? And all the things that flow out of that. And third, because I think sometimes for Christians this can be a tricky topic area. So, at the very basic level, if someone says that they're struggling with anxiety, do I just say to them, well, Jesus says in Matthew 6, don't worry, so there you are, you're fixed now. Now we all instinctively know that's kind of not a sufficient response. But, well, how do we deal with this area? How do we avoid it being, well, just pull your socks up and get on with it, sunshine? Which none of us want to say, but maybe we struggle for what we say instead. Is that I guess the fourth thing of the three is that sense perhaps that people have a question, which is there's so much more of this around. Is that because there's so much more of this around, or are there other reasons why we are where we are in 2025 as opposed to where we were in 2020? Now, we talked beforehand about what we're going to talk about. That may or may not be some of the things we agreed, but those were the things that came off the top of my head when I started speaking a few minutes ago. So that's why we're talking about mental health.
Yes. And it's worth saying that this conversation would not be good therapy. So,
yeah.
We're going to try and talk about it. It's going to be quite theoretical, quite practical at times. If you're in a moment of struggling or whatever, this is not going to be particularly...
So this is more a podcast about helping us as individuals as a church understand what's going on a bit more from a Christian perspective, rather than here are some things that might help your mental health.
Yeah. And obviously, and if you are in that sphere, come and talk to us and come and find us and do that chat.
That's a very helpful distinction. Yeah, thank you. So I suppose the first question is, I think we're conscious that we are, in 2025, we're in a space we weren't in before. How did we get here?
Yeah, I think we can talk to this. I can talk to this a little bit. So obviously we're not experts in this, but this was one of the areas that I did my masters on. Yeah. And one of the areas that if I do a PhD that I will.
So your masters was on the intersection between theology and psychology.
My area, what I'm interested in is that the spirituality aspect of psychology, how these things relate to one another. And you tend to get, in my experience, people who have done a lot of psychology and dipped their toe into theology, or they've done a lot of theology and they dipped their toe into psychology, and how that world interacts. And so that's the bit that I'm interested in. And
of course theology doesn't really sit on its own away from everything. If you ignore it, you end up shaping it by accident, and if you go and do it, then it's going to be everywhere because it's how everything works. So that's tricky.
Yeah, absolutely. And so in terms of how we got here, I mean, if you go back far enough, we have always had, culturally, you always have figures within culture that are the ones that people turn to. Yeah. So historically in Christian worlds, it was the priest. And the priest was seen to be the authority that you could go to and you could trust them. And they were, to some extent, on account of their office, were given a degree of credibility and trust. And they, and so you had those figures. In other cultures, you have the witch doctor or someone who sits in that role, and they are the medicine and soul searching, and that's, the church has a huge history in hospitals and a huge interest in caring for people. And if you're interested in spirituality and all of that, you tend to always link there will always be a bridge between physical and spiritual, because they are intertwined, and anyone who's thought to any degree about them sees the interconnectedness of those two things. And so historically that's what you had, and you had it, they would view it both positively and negatively. So the positive spiritual psychological experiences that you were having, and how do you guide that, and also the negative ones. So that's the foreground. And obviously language here I think is really important. Therefore, to some extent, if you go to a philosopher with a problem, they'll give you a philosophical answer. If you go to a psychologist, they'll give you a psychological. If you go to a church theologian, they'll give you a theological answer. By and large, we have the language that we have, and that's how we diagnose things. And so if you look back, problems were articulated in that way.
Yeah, and I think we'd probably say, and maybe this is unfair, this is fair, what you think, we'd probably say that that in terms of mental health, in terms of the treatment of those with conditions that we would probably these days diagnose as fairly serious mental health conditions, that we've not always covered ourselves in glory. So the classic, the classic sort of Shakespearean figure of the person in the asylum, the crazy figure slightly played for laughs. Is not a kind of particularly glorious way of thinking about the challenges of mental health, is it? So there is that issue in the past, as well as
call people witches.
You call them at the stake.
And
that sense of, and I think it's overcooked in terms of how people did it, because I think there's a bit of both, but certainly that sort of sense that the language around mental health has not always been helpful. No,
and it's similar, and at some point we could get on to the demonic and all of that, and the church's history in relationship to all of that. So to some extent, the modern psychology movement is kind of a post-Enlightenment shift. Kind of science has come around, a new set of language that is no longer theological language to explain everything. It is its own area, field of study that's kind of liberated itself away from being under the priest, and therefore is discovering things in a scientific way. So in an Enlightenment sense, we're talking 1700s, 1800s, and for psychology, are we talking about the figures we'd have heard about? I know they wouldn't necessarily call themselves psychologists. Are we talking people like Freud and Jung? Yes. Is that? So there's somebody else, isn't there? Adler. Yeah, Adler. And there's one more who wrote Principles of Psychology. Came now, I can't remember. Anyway, but late 19th century. So you get the kind of scientific split, and then off the back of that, you get increased. That then starts to impact medical fields, and then you get what are called the analysts.
That sounds tricky, because part of the Enlightenment thing is we're going to get rid of all these overeducated, talking about things you can't see people, and we're going to do the scientific thing and just deal with what we can see and what's provable and straightforward. So it must have taken a little while to get to something that's complicated. I think you're working on really reductive. I think you're working on the assumption that the Enlightenment is internally consistent with itself. Okay, that might be a mistake.
Well, but on one level, psychology has always been a field that has struggled to find its place, academically speaking. Okay. And so there's the whole debate was around that, was like, is this true science? Yeah. And especially the early stages, what's sometimes called the kind of psychoanalytic, or which tends to split into two forms, as to a Christian version and a spiritually open version, or a very atheistic version. Okay. So Freud, very atheistic in his view of humans and all of that, and then you have Carl Jung, and their split was mainly over a belief in the beyond. Okay. And so that and you kind of get this split going on. But so this language therefore develops around and certain models. And if you go back to them, a lot of them were very explicit in understanding, rewriting certain Christian theological ideas, some more explicitly than others. And the idea of talking therapy was lifted straight from the idea of confession. And a lot of the foundations for talking therapy is fundamentally very different, very similar to the church's history.
So the idea of talking therapy is that if you talk about something, it's helpful. I know that's a really basic thing to say, but actually, if you talk about something, and if somebody who's qualified asks you the right kind of questions, they'll get at some of the stuff that's actually buried below the question, and therefore some of the real stuff will come out that you've deliberately or not knowing, out of your subconscious stuff that you've hidden,
yes.
And that you'll get that out into the open. You'll air that only with them and in a safe environment, and that will help you. Is that
yes? So what
at a simple level is that what
you've just articulated there is all the well understood and accepted things that Freud was largely made popular.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
So the kind of that there is an unconscious side to us.
Yeah.
We could talk about what that means theologically, because again, it was a theological idea.
Oh yeah.
And that repression is an issue.
Yes.
And
okay.
you make conscious, so you articulate it, you bring it out, you confess it.
Yeah.
And you get it on the table, and then you're able to deal with it.
Okay.
Again, how you then deal with that.
Okay.
So a lot of therapy. So Freud kind of stopped there.
So Freud would
You bring
have
it
said,
out.
Once you brought it out, that helps.
You bring it out, and that helps.
Yeah,
and to a degree, it does.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's the thing about stuff like this, is you can hear that and say, yeah, I can see that. I can see that sometimes, sitting down with someone who knows you well and getting them to help you articulate what the problem is helpful.
Yeah. And it's interesting. So, and at the time, most of Freud's clients were, the oversimplification, were somewhat Victorian middle class, who weren't psychotic, so didn't have kind of schizophrenia or mass delusions. They were, at the time, conceived as neurotic, so depression and anxious and things like that. And the big issues at the time, just before we came on, you talked about, we can't talk about death.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
And at that time, death, everyone talked about death.
Yes.
No one talked about sex. And no one could really talk about anger to a large degree.
Okay.
And so Freud
Gets very excited.
focuses on those two things. And so everyone looks back and goes, life isn't all about sex. And Freud in the end said life isn't all about sex. But when you're in a culture that
Isn't talking about sex.
isn't talking about sex, in the same way that we could talk about a culture,
Doesn't talk
the
about
fear of death,
Yeah.
and what that does, and the angst of that is going on. So you have that as a kind of foundation, and you see a lot of stuff about trying to piece together a kind of more scientific approach, and that language then becomes filtrated and embedded.
So this is like James's Idiot's Guide to various things he's picked up over the years about Freud. So interpretation of dreams, which is like Freud's thing, is one of the reasons for going down that route, is that kind of feels like you can do like a scientific thing on it. Do you know what I mean? That you can get like a big sample and you can say, lots of people have this dream, lots of people have that dream, these are commonalities, these kind of things keep cropping up. Is that part of what's going on there? And not to say that it's not worth doing, I'm just saying that it's part of that, about how do I come up with something scientific? One of the ways to come up with something scientific is to produce a data set that can be interrogated.
So the dream analysis, the reason that they were the analysts, there's a bit of their name, the dream analysis, why they got so interested in dreams, is because it's one of the clearest and most easiest way to access the unconscious.
Yeah.
Because you yourself haven't jacked it up. And so you yourself haven't controlled it.
Yeah. Are they talking subconscious or unconscious, or is it the same thing?
Similar things.
Okay.
Similar things. And so they're interested in lots of different areas in which you can do that. The science that came behind it was more around the area of complexes. So they had a word association test.
Okay.
In which you'd see people's responses to different words. And so the science was like, basically what they did, they had a list of words, and they would say, tell me the first thing that comes into your mind when I say tea. when I say bush, when I say computer, when I say whatever, and they would record how long you take it and any changes.
So basically, and then if people say T-sex, bush sex, you kind of
you go. Okay, what's going on? Why is there jumps? Or why does suddenly I say beer and you cannot answer?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
You cannot answer, and then you dig in. You go, oh my gosh, my dad was an alcoholic. Blah blah blah.
Yeah.
Blah,
Okay.
blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. Or you start crying. Yeah. Okay.
Or you start crying,
Yeah.
and so there was some. And that then gets end up in a lot of our psychology, personality profiles.
Yeah, I was thinking about
like
personality
that.
profiles. Yeah.
So that's how that comes about. So that's a little bit of the science of it. So you get that sphere. They are semi-accepted by modern science and medical, but there's still quite a degree of skepticism about them.
So the skepticism you would have is the classic skepticism of the role of the interviewer in the experiment. That always, that if you put any kind of modern experiment together, you recognise that the person doing the interpreting impacts the outcome. Do you know what I mean? To put it at a very basic level, if you're being interviewed by someone who looks just like your father, might trigger you in a particular. Well, that might trigger you in a look way. If you're sitting with someone who, is it the opposite sex to you or the same sex? Do you know what I mean? All those things are going to impact what's in your head,
in your mind,
and therefore your responses.
Yes, and so one of the reasons. So, for example, if you take, one of the reasons why, and still to this day, I think, personal view, I think there is a difference between. I don't think mental health it can be equated to exactly the same way, and one of the reasons that I think you can see that is you go. If you pick up a medical textbook about diagnosing broken arms, you have a pretty kind of objective test.
Yes.
And is the bone in whichever arm is it?
How many pieces is it?
Is it broken? And the way in which you discern that is you X-ray it.
You can see it. You can touch it. You can feel it.
Yeah. So the treatment might change over the years.
Yes.
But the diagnosis.
The diagnosis is somewhat objective. And I think you could put it in the category objective. When you go to psychology manuals, and even the latest manual, which is the most that's tried to lean towards a more medical chemical idea of it, you still won't. It reads differently. It reads a set of how you interpret it and feel things. Now I'm painting a broad brush.
Yeah.
But that's what we need.
But you don't get this neurotransmitter in this part of the body is flaring up, and you put them in a scan and you do this scan.
Because people have sort of tried to do that, haven't they? They've tried to sort of go and say, oh, well, it's these things doing this, but they've never really been able to say, we can isolate it so that we absolutely know it's because your X and your Y and your Z are firing wrong, that we fix it.
And this is because there is what's called the hard problem of consciousness, and that is that we don't understand how you get from stuff happening chemically in your brain to a first-person experience of that.
Yeah, there is no explanation for that.
And that appears to be it's called the hard problem because it appears to be with all our advancements take us no further in deciding it. And the brain is incredibly complex.
Yeah.
Incredibly complex. And it varies, and there's no consistency.
So we have a description of what's happening.
Or we know it's involved.
Yeah. But what I mean is, we can say this synapse is firing, that synapse is firing, these things are happening, these chemical reactions are going on, and when those chemical reactions are going on, we can observe these things happening, but we can't explain, as you say, the first-person experience of that.
And to what extent what is causing it, and what is response.
We're also going to talk a little bit, probably quite a lot later on, about diagnosis and maybe kids in school and all that kind of thing, and you get the problem there that with a broken arm we can all sort of go, an arm's simple-ish and it looks like this and it looks like this, but all our minds and personalities are different anyway, so it's a lot harder to set it in a cast and make it normal shape, because we don't know what we're aiming for
and it's something that you can isolate easier. I put a cast. Why do you put a cast? People don't need a cast. It just stops them from doing it, moving it. Right, doesn't it? It's like you could just turn around and go, just don't move that arm.
Yeah, but that's hard.
But that's very difficult to do.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to turn around and go, don't use that particular part of your brain.
Yeah. Well, Jesus says, "Don't worry," and we're sat here to talk about how on earth do I just turn off the worry bit.
Well, and that's the thing. You can't isolate it. Even if you knew where it was, you still can't. You can't isolate it. I mean, it's debilitating to not be able to use your arm for a month, but possible. But you just can't switch off bits of your brain. You kind of need them.
And also, we're not that well in control of this. So we talked a tiny bit about subconscious and all this stuff that we're a bit messy. I'm thinking of Romans 7, where Paul says,
I do the things I don't want to do, and I don't do the things I want to do.
Yes.
Well, that confession, where we confess to the things that we did do that we shouldn't have done, and the things that we didn't do that we should have done. I mean,
and the last part of this conversation is, I'm like this. Can we make that different?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So finishing the kind of history piece, that introduces a new language of describing a set of experiences and a new way of talking about something. And it is obviously very separate to the church. And the church then responds to that. Either by dismissing or attempting to engage or taking, and this is the other thing that is really, really important. Psychology hasn't finished. Do you know what I mean? It's like the same anything. Like, these departments still exist, materials are still being produced, the latest manual is coming out, and the one after that will come out.
So the manual you're talking about is the diagnostic manual. So if I'm sitting with I'm in a medical setting and I've got this person presenting to me and I'm the psychologist and I've got to put a name to what's going on. That's what we're talking about?
So
I need to put a name to it for their sake, really, because from a professional perspective, because if I can put a name to it, then we can possibly help them out with some treatment. Whereas if I can't put a name to it, we don't know what to do.
Yes, and so it's categorised, and there's one by the World Health Organization, or kind of line more that, and there's one line by the American Psychological Association, and that's what doctors will be turning to, or when they're on their computer looking, that's what they're googling.
Yeah.
And up pops a list of symptoms that have been grouped together and categorised and put together, and it changes and moves.
Right. So I'm also seeing an overlap here between this and some of the more difficult to diagnose physical conditions. So there are physical conditions, aren't there, that we identify, but that the diagnosis, and it's not, it's like I can see there's something happening, but this is really difficult to. Yeah,
in the same way you go, you hear the announcement of, we've just had a breakthrough in understanding of Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
Or whatever. This is still a moving field of trying to better understand
what's going on.
At the same time, possibly generationally, we also behave and look a little bit different to each other. So we've got a set of boxes, and we've got a very complicated set of people, and it's going to be very hard to keep track of what we're all like.
Yeah, and so within that and within those changes, you have waves of different forms of therapy. Yeah. So, for example, I said before, and you go dreams, right? That's what you think of. In the same way that people might have heard a lot of is CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy, or very other types of forms of therapy and things like that. And they are all somewhat will sit in a particular branch of viewing of what it means to be human. What does human suffering look like? How does the body work? How does the mind work? Yeah. And now what do we do in response?
So this is the sort of secular psychological problem, isn't it? Is that it's really hard to do psychology without getting close to the questions which scientifically you're trying to avoid asking. It's hard to avoid doing psychology without starting to ask the why questions and the purpose questions, which, to be honest, if you're just doing, you can't completely avoid them in medicine, can you, in traditional medicine, but if you're if your job is to fix someone's arm, you don't actually have to ask bigger questions about them. Whereas if you're talking about someone's psychology, it's hard to disentangle that from their sense of self.
Yeah. So one of the things you're seeing at the minute, it's sometimes called the fourth wave of treatment, is moving away from trying to treat illnesses, from trying to develop what we would call human flourishing.
Yeah, okay.
So it's like, okay, you've come into me with this issue, but I want to look at how do you find meaning and purpose in your life on a whole. You hear people kind of talk about holistic therapies or holistic approaches.
Right,
and again,
okay.
you see it is all to somewhat will depend on those big questions of how
Okay,
you
so with my vicar hat on, I'm sitting there now thinking, whoa, okay, who's qualified for that, and how are these people who are doing this qualified for that? Because actually, helping people with spiritual questions is not like it's not straightforward, and it's not necessarily something that you would just want anybody to feel that they could competently do. It's like doing it with your friends. I'm not talking about we all help each other, that we know people, but doing it with someone you don't know, that's actually like, that's quite a specialist thing.
Well, and this is really part of the problem in the sense that the church lost culturally we lost the confidence in people clear to deal with this well.
Yeah.
And that's no one's fault really apart from the church, because the church did handle them badly.
No, absolutely.
And so people, when anyone, no matter what the pain or the suffering is, no matter whether it is, a breathing issue or a mental health issue or whatever it is, you're just like, I need help. And so you're going to turn to the people that you trust. And in today's culture, when we decided that we didn't trust the priest, by and large, the people that we then now turn to trust is the doctor.
Yeah.
And they then become this position. And there's plenty of doctors who themselves will be in this position going, I can't. This is not. I was not trained to do this. I was not trained to do this. And then you get a certain, and it doesn't need to be mentioned, but navigated. You get other areas that engage, and one of those areas is money and politics.
Yeah, of course.
How is this viewed politically and financially?
Yeah. So as we're talking today, there's been a piece on the news about West Streeting, so that might date this podcast if he's not health secretary anymore by the time you listen to this. Needing to investigate just why are there so many of these diagnoses? What was it, ADHD?
ADHD,
and autism. Why is the diagnosis rate just spiked?
Yes.
Now that's a reasonable question to answer, but we were saying before we came on that you can't help feel that, and this is nobody's fault, it's the reality that one of the questions that's being asked is, how has this got so expensive? And I get that. I get why that question exists, because there's a finite amount of resource in the National Health Service, but of course, as you said earlier, it's not the best question always to be asking, is it?
It's good to ask alongside lots of other ones.
There are other questions.
It can be a bit of political football, can't it? Because it's complicated, so often we all just go to different ends of the spectrum. So a few weeks ago, I think it was Richard Tice was saying he'd seen children in classrooms wearing earphones and he was outraged and that was terrible. And I've seen a lot of teachers say, could you be quiet, because it's more complicated.
Who's Richard Tice?
That's where we... he's a reform...
reform guy.
Sorry if that's offensive to people. I don't know who he is, but I genuinely have never heard of him.
And the other area that is not insignificant, but you don't want to fuel it being everything, is pharmaceutical industry.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you can diagnose an issue as a pharmaceutical one with a drug that can become attached to it, there's a lot of money in that, and
quite a lot of history in that, isn't there?
And a lot of history in that.
Helper and all that.
And exactly, and so treatments. If you're, honestly, this isn't always the case, and of course it varies, but the health service is under a degree of pressure. If you have something in which you can give someone that goes away with, there's a lot of work that's done on kind of placebos and the psychological impact of being able to give someone something
to take.
Something that is incredibly powerful.
Yes.
So basically, if I got any one of those pills, any medication, and asked you in normal circumstances, take this, what would you do? You'd go, no chance. If I go, I'm just going to drop in some diabetes or cancer medications you drink. You're not drinking it because it's massive and it's powerful. and you're like, I don't know what that does to me. In the same way that if you go and take this, it's incredibly psychologically powerful, and does help people.
For both people.
Yeah.
Yes, it's using a technical term. It can be called a psychoid, which is basically a physical, very powerful psychological, spiritual thing in physical form. It's
Okay.
therefore can be aligned to communion.
Okay. That's like most suggest. So, have we got to where we are? How did we get here?
So that kind of leads us into this space of people, and obviously now a lot of work has been done to normalize the language, to try and reduce stigma and shame around the language, and all of this kind of stuff. And so then it's just opened the field up a little bit. The church is responding in lots of different ways. I mean, you see lots more written about it.
Yeah.
Again, church's environment engagement with it will vary.
So we need to come back.
Kind of
We need to come back to the next time. So we think we've got to how did we get here, and then next time we'll work out where we are. Brilliant.